Hello everyone, and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be looking at the pros and the cons of triathlon clubs, or tri-clubs. And these are a real sort of stalwart, at least in Europe, they're quite a major part of triathlon culture. However, there are several triathletes, well I'd say it's much more common to find triathletes that aren't a member of a club than it is to find triathletes who are members of a club. And now, you might be a triathlete who's never really heard of clubs before. You could be a triathlete who's a club member. I want to use this episode to break down reasons why I'm pro tri-club, but also anti tri-club at the same time, and why that does ultimately depend on sort of you, your goals, and sort of the clubs that are around you. And that's something I really want you to keep to the forefront of your mind throughout this episode, is that I am, well, I guess in my mind, when I think about triathlon clubs, I think about my old triathlon club, which I was very involved with. However, there are lots of clubs out there which are, a lot more triathlon focused than mine was. Mine was sort of a running club with a large triathlon arm to it. Some of them are pure triathlon clubs, and some of them are also sort of a lot better. I think it was pretty good. I mean, I was head of triathlon at this club for sort of 3 or 4 years. I'd like to think I did a decent job. But there was definitely sort of issues that we had when it came to pool time and coaching and and all this, and the fact that at the end of the day we were overseen by sort of a group of runners, some of who were very anti-triathlon. And meanwhile, there will be plenty of other clubs that don't offer nearly what it is that we did. I know sort of some sort of clubs, as it were, in inverted commas, I guess you could say, they just sort of run one swim session a week. So there really is a huge variety out there of different triathlon clubs. I don't want you to think that, what I'm explaining is the only option out there. Look around, chat to people, see what's out there, and sort of get involved, really. Now, on to the subject at hand. The major downside to triathlon clubs is the fact that they're very rigid. If you have a swimming session on a Thursday evening, and these swim sessions, they're normally quite late in the day, because there'll be I can't just go along to a pool and say I'd like to book this pool every Thursday evening indefinitely, and they go, oh yes sir, that will be £150 a week. They will go, well, there are other clubs who have got sessions booked in here. And you need to sort of, it's like there are certain jobs where people say, look, realistically you need to wait for somebody to retire or die before you're going to get that promotion or be able to work in that, because it's so specialist, there are so few people doing it that it really is kind of a bit of a waiting game. And the same can be said for triathlon clubs. So I really want you to sort of think that if you are unable to make the swim session, and the swim session is the main reason for you joining, it's probably not going to end up being worth it. Now, don't get me wrong, triathlon clubs, the annual fees that you pay for most of them are normally relatively low. There are some slightly more premium triathlon clubs out there that I think they charge sort of £30 or £40 a month, but you get access to all of their sessions, which I think is great. But a lot of sort of the majority of tri clubs out there, it's a case of you pay sort of a relatively small fee annually, but you pay sort of £7, £8, £10 a swim session when you go along there. And this is to help cover the cost of the pool. Some coaches are paid, some are volunteers. Now, when I was, you might think, oh, I can tell why you're salty, Simon. When I was head of triathlon at this very large running club, one of the major ethoses of one of the founders was that no coaches should be making any money from their involvement in the club. That all of it is going to be done on a voluntary basis. However, I think a lot of sort of more, in air quotes, proper triathlon clubs, they do pay their coaches. And so you will have sort of hopefully the the wages, I guess, the fee of the coach to cover, as well as the pool cover itself. And let's face it, all clubs, all organisations, they want to make sure that they have, some financial reserves in the bank. So, there may be a small amount will be going generally towards the club coffers. The idea, I think most clubs are just happy to break even. They're not a for-profit group, but if it's a case of we can get a bunch of extra sort of swim equipment for people. Or we can sort of rent a lock-up to keep kit in. There's a lot of different possibilities out there of why is it that triathlon clubs, they do need sort of this money. But generally speaking, it's not a huge financial obligation up front to join a club. I guess it's a matter of how much you're going to get out of it. And a lot of people, when they think of triathlon coaching, they think of swim coaching. So if this is you and you need swim coaching, you need sort of help with your stroke, and they only have one swim session a week, or they have two, but you can't make it. You can't get to the pool because you work strange hours. It could be that you have a young family, you got to be back for bedtime. There's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't be able to make that swim session. And the downside is, if you're unable to make the sessions that you're interested in, there's limited worth in a club. Now, many triathlon clubs, they will have their swim session, 1 or 2 sessions. That's normally a bit of a flagship session for the club. But in addition to this, they'll often have a run session, which may be held at a running track, if you're lucky, or it could be it's more of where we go out across sort of the local parks, the local commons, down the local bridleways, run in a group, have a bit of a chit chat. And to be honest, I think those are some of my favourite sessions, the ones that I miss the most. I am part of a running club at the moment that has a triathlon arm. It's much smaller, but they don't have social runs, unfortunately. It mainly revolves around 2 coach running sessions in a week and a weekend swim session. I do miss sort of the more social aspect that comes with that. When you're absolutely out of breath at the end of an interval, not generally time that you want to be sort of striking up conversation, getting to know people in the same way. Anyway, sort of these sort of run sessions will also be there, and bike sessions as well. And 95% of the time, there are a few clubs that have sort of coach bike sessions. But my old one did. But the vast majority of clubs, their cycle offering is going to be sort of a weekend ride. And this is where I find that sort of triathlon clubs, they tend to fall down. Not, I guess, fall down, but it's where they are of limited use to a number of people. Because if you get a group of athletes together, and they say, right, we're going to head out and we're going to ride to this place. You go, right, great. And it will be a group, and, chances are a lot of people in the group are going to know each other. And when I was in London in this club, it would be, relatively sort of steady going, making our way out of London. But then as we got towards Surrey, you get some hills, and it would turn into a bit of a race. You would have these really fit, fast cyclists, including a younger version of myself, who would see any hill as being a chance to put others to the sword, to really go and shoot up off the hill, have a race with others, set in your Strava personal best, get to the top, and, recover. And then everybody else would join, and sort of the issue with this model, which, I admit I was part of the problem previously, is the faster athletes would get to the top of the hill and they'd be there for sort of 2 or 3 minutes, and then you have the slower athletes would just come over the top of the hill. And I tried not to be this person, but I know other riders definitely were. They go, right, okay, let's go, let's push on. And this poor rider at the back who really struggled to pull themselves over this hill. All the faster athletes have had a bunch of recovery sat at the top, and then they go down the other side. And these slower riders, they can't even get their breath back before they're going again. And this can be very off-putting to people who are looking to improve, who are looking for some confidence, to ride in a group outside. It's, it does turn into a bit of a smash fest. People will decide that they're going to go for this Strava segment, or they're getting a bit bored, so they're going to put their foot down. And we're all going to ride fast, along this bit here. When you've got others who've gone, oh, okay, well, they're going out for a 60-kilometre ride. Well, I've done 50 and I think I'm ready for 60, so I'll go along. And they turn up, and even some of these advertised slow groups or steady groups, they're really not that slow. You can have quite fast athletes who turn up with the slower athletes and kind of feel the need to show off a little bit. Push the pace, come on everybody, let's go, and try to make it about them rather than about the slower riders. So it's you can definitely have people turn up to these rides and go, oh, I can manage 50 kilometers, but they weren't expecting 50 kilometers with hills and sprints and people sort of working hard on the flat, setting up a chain gang. It just, yeah, it's not good training. I'll be honest. Now, if you were to look at that session, some people could say, oh yeah, well, we had some easy bits, then we had some hills, we had some sprints, and we did a chain gang. So that's like a really well-rounded ride. That's great. We trained all of our systems there. Okay, we didn't really do a good job at any of them. Because you were carrying all this fatigue over. The easy stuff was too easy. If I were to go and do a group ride today, if I was sat on the front of the group, and this was kind of like your standard kind of long ride, zone 2 kind of intensity. So, definitely working, but not too hard. If I was on the front of the group, I'd probably be working closer into to zone 3 if I'm riding with athletes of a similar ability. Be, riding a little bit harder into the wind, keeping things going. And then I drop back into the group and suddenly I'm in zone 1. So it's very difficult. Again, it's not impossible. If you're riding with somebody else who is a similar speed to you, a small group, and you all agree you're going to hold this same kind of intensity, and you take regular turns on the front, yeah, it could be great. But if you have a large group, if you've got 6 or more riders of varied abilities and you're going out, it's not going to help you prepare for your event very well. It's great fun, and there's definitely a social aspect to it. And I'm not saying you should never do it, but it does turn into a a bit of a dick measuring contest, really, along a lot of cyclists. It's all about, who can get to the top of the hill first, who can put the most power down, who can, show off quite often. And that's just not conclusive to, especially 70.3 in Ironman training. If you're doing shorter events, there might be a bit more mileage in that. If you all really get your heads down and push hard on the flat into a headwind, you can find yourself working quite hard there. But a lot of the time it is this kind of surge and then easy, surge, easy that these rides are made up of. That's not how you're going to race. If you approach an Ironman like that, you're not going to finish. It's all about that more steady effort. Yes, is that steady effort a bit more boring? Undoubtedly. Is it effective? Hell to the yes. And I guess, this is where people have to reflect and they go, well, what are my goals with triathlon? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? Am I trying to go out there? Am I trying to achieve the best time I possibly can? Or am I looking to have fun while staying fit and have these new challenges? And yeah, you have to ask yourself that. But if you find yourself plateauing, if you do a lot of group riding, if you find yourself struggling to improve, then doing more in the way of solo riding may be the way to go about this. Now, I've worked with dozens of athletes, probably hundreds of athletes, come to think of it, over the years, and I've written programs for them. And they will say to me sometimes, oh yes, I've got this group ride, there's this chain gang, there's this that I do. And if I were to say to them, well, if you're going to work with me, you need to drop those, okay? I need commitment, we need specificity, we need to achieve this. That's not going to go down well. They're going to go, well, they might go, all right then, but they'll be miserable doing that because they miss having that social aspect, or they'll go find another coach. And the way that I approach it is I go, look, over the winter, I think this time of year, generally, some riders, yeah, if riding with a group, if it's the option is either riding with a group or not getting the ride done, ride with a group every single time. Over the winter, most people who are looking at doing longer distance events or have performance goals, I say, look, I think a week on the group ride, a week off the group ride is a good compromise. So you're still getting long, steady sessions at that sort of intensity that we're looking for, but we are also at the same time including some really sort of, some fun, social, interesting, explore new places, sit around a cafe for sort of 45 minutes in the middle of a ride. We're having that kind of more fun social aspect in there because maybe we don't want to lose that. But as we start to get closer to our races, is this something that we still want to include? Well, it's up to the rider. It's up to how serious they are. It's up to the goals that they have. If somebody is looking to go under 10 hours for an Ironman, then I'm going to say, look, honestly, from, sort of 4 or 5 months out from your race onwards, we do need to be riding solo. We do need to be getting the most out of our training. Whereas if somebody's just looking to have a bit of fun, take on their first 70.3, then, sure, fitting a group ride in is, again, it can be engaging, it can be fun, it can mix things up, and it can also remember people why they started the sport in the first place. I think a lot of triathletes are guilty of, I got into triathlon because I like swimming, I like cycling, I like running. And they find themselves doing a lot of training sessions and that just don't speak to them. They don't really enjoy. And as a result, they kind of fall out of the sport. And there, you do have to get that balance right between what's optimal and what's engaging, motivating, and fun. Now, for running, this is a lot less problematic because it's a lot easier, because there isn't that drafting effect. It's a lot easier to get the kind of intensity that you're looking for. And, intervals, if you are doing sort of hill reps as a group or track work, it's easier for you to get a good quality workout of your own in. I guess the more motivating part for me about run clubs is the races. When you turn up to, a good amount of, I always enjoy these run races personally, cross country or road races or occasionally some sort of like mile races. I think it's great if you put on that club shirt, and you feel that you're part of something larger than yourself. And there's that camaraderie with your teammates, some of who you'll know very well, and it really does, it gets my juices going, let's put it that way. I know some people think, what do you mean you want to run across a muddy field in January? Like, what's wrong with you? And yeah, I hear you, I get it. But for me, there is just something about that kind of working as a team, being part of something larger than myself that, I quite like. Obviously I've got all these sessions that I do on my own, that are just focused on me and my triathlon goals. But having these run sessions, they're a great way to sort of to give yourself a fitness test. If you can find yourself sort of 5K events to do, you can test your thresholds as you're participating in races. Not every race has to be all out either. And I honestly, I think I owe the athlete that I am today to that sort of to those races, to that environment. It really was sort of fantastic. Now, as I mentioned, the triathlon club that I was part of was part of a much bigger running club. I think we had around about 800 members on the books. It really was massive. And one of the downsides of sort of tri clubs, run clubs, is that they don't attract, exclusively good, honest, decent people. Now, there's only so much that I am willing to share here, but I have heard of running clubs where you have had male members of the running club who are there primarily to prey on younger women who join the club. And they'll be all very, they'll see them come in through the door and they'll be straight, oh, hello, what's your name? They'll be very charming, very nice. And, they will sort of spend, I'll show you the ropes, stay with me, I'll run at your pace, And for a nervous runner, to have someone come along and to go, hey, I'm going to look after you, don't worry, I'll make sure you're not on your own, you're not the slowest, all this. That can be really valuable. And in a lot of cases, this sort of can turn into a romantic arrangement. with the individual then starting to become abusive. And this is something that I think, run clubs, there's only so much that they, in some cases, they have limited powers to be able to prevent this. The only thing they can do, because it's a police matter, if in many cases, there's only so much they can do aside from banning a member of the club. But by banning a member, because when you consider that a lot of people won't know what's going on behind closed doors, this is something that just happens. There are anonymous reports that come in. Somebody ends up getting banned. That upsets an awful lot of the other members. So unfortunately, it's you do have people at run clubs who are there, predatory behaviour, and it's quite difficult for the committees of these clubs to be able to counter this because they have sort of limited tools to do so. And you do just, whenever you have this volume of people that are congregating together, you are going to find issues. Now, some of these issues are simply differences of opinion. I think we should run the club like this. I think we should have these sessions. I don't think we should do this. I think we should spend money on this. That's one thing. But you do get a number of people who are very problematic because swimming, running, cycling attracts all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life. And let's face it, a lot of people will join these clubs if they are single and they're looking to maybe meet people who have a similar interest. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you do definitely get some, I'm not going to say it's exclusively men, you do definitely get some people who will join these clubs and they'll be a part of the club, and they're often very fast runners as well. They'll be a part of this club, but with sort of ulterior motives. And, this is something that, it bothers me. But it's just part of human nature. And whenever you get a group of people together like this, you're going to have friction. Now, the vast majority of sort of friction within a running club, it does come at the managerial level. Now, every club has, I might be using the terms running and triathlon club interchangeably at a few points here. I apologise if I do. But as I said at the start, a number of triathlon clubs are sort of based from a running club. But a number of, all triathlon clubs will have a committee. Your standard classic community tri club. And this will be a group of individuals, normally around a dozen people. You have your chairperson, you have your treasurer, your secretary, you might have your kit rep, you might have your social rep, you might have some members representatives, you might have your events rep, communications rep. There are a huge amount of people who are involved with the running of a club, and I don't think a lot of people realise just how much goes on behind the scenes to keep the wheels turning. And the downside of this is that you end up with a lot of people on the committee who have been there for decades in some cases, and they are very conservatively minded, shall we say, when it comes to, I wouldn't pretend to know what their political beliefs are, but at least when it comes to the running of the club, they don't want to spend money, they don't want to try anything new, and a lot of them, especially in the case of running clubs, they talk about the heritage, the legacy. We've been doing this, running these sessions since the mid-80s, we're sure as hell not going to stop now on my watch. And they can be very sort of anti-progress. And triathletes, they can... I think, triathletes, generally speaking, we tend to sort of see opportunities more. We want to progress, we want to do things differently, we want to find ways to optimise. A lot of runners, for them, it is much more a case of, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing over and over. I have this training I do this time of year, I do these races, and I try not to get slower each year. There's nothing wrong with that, but when you have a club that is based on that ethos, it can be quite frustrating, especially when these are the individuals who have, have the purse strings, and you're trying to persuade them that actually, what we really would benefit from having this, or it would be really would be great if we could consider, even if it's even if there's no money involved, it can be very difficult. And that is one of my major sort of reservations, is that everything is done sort of democratically. And don't get me wrong, I am a believer in democracy in areas where it's important, such as the running of a country. I'm not such a fan of democracy when it comes to clubs, because I feel that you have so many people with so many sort of ill-informed opinions, I guess. People who won't listen, people who won't consider things. And it's those with the loudest voices who campaign really against something or for something that tend to get their way, rather than based on the actual sort of strength and quality of their arguments. And I get it. I'm absolutely not saying that clubs shouldn't listen to their members. That is not what I'm saying at all. But it's when you have a large group of people who are saying we would really like this, but you have an even larger group of people who say, well, we don't think that that's a good use of our time or money. That does get quite frustrating, especially when the idea that's being proposed is an objectively good idea that wouldn't cost much money. And you do end up with this churn in the management committees of these clubs, because somebody will come along, and don't get me wrong, you do have some people who will come in and they'll go, I'm going to change this, I'm going to do this is wrong, we're going to do it like this, that's wrong, we need to do this. And they didn't normally last more than a few months, because everybody pushes back. So they go, look, you're trying to do too much too soon. They've got sort of the Liz Truss approach to management. And we're not about that. But it's when you have people who are, they try to make some progress. They listen to the members and they take this to the committee, and the committee just keeps going, oh no, that's not going to work. There's only so long that someone can keep getting rebuffed by the same people again and again, no matter what ideas they bring to the table, before they go, oh, you know what, forget it. I'm going to do other things with my time. Now, speaking of volunteers, there are an awful lot of coaches out there who will volunteer their time. I mean, all of the, I hate to think, probably close to 1,000 hours that I spend on poolside coaching, completely for free. Volunteering my time, as well as the time I spent on the committee and organising a race one year. Yes, I'm a race director as well. Not a very good one, I have to say. But the amount of time that I gave voluntary, a lot of people couldn't justify it. Now, the reason I could justify it is because I was starting out in coaching, and I thought, I want to hone my craft. I want to get hours in on poolside. I started off assisting, and after a couple of years, when the previous coach left, we couldn't find a alternative exterior replacement. I was doing my British Triathlon Level 2, and I ended up taking over the group. And we, it's okay if somebody is just sort of cutting their teeth, but you have to remember that not all coaches are created equal. And this goes, I guess it's probably more, this is, more the case in coaching than other sort of jobs. There are lots of other professions where, you can pick things up really quite quickly. Whereas coaching, because there's such an art to it as well as a science to it, it really does take, decades for somebody to really sort of become the best coach that they can be. And I'm talking, decades of, CPD and experience as a sort of a professional full-time coach. And now, volunteers, like I was at the time, who are just sort of there running sessions, just trying to keep the lights on at the club, trying to keep things going, trying to keep members happy, just trying to keep the sport of triathlon building, keep it going. They are, in many respects, the lifeblood, of the sport. Without them, the participation would be much lower, I'm sure. However, because not all coaches are created equal, you do get a very large sort of disparity in ability in triathlon clubs. Because you'll get some that are delivered by like really, really good coaches. Even though in many cases those coaches might actually only run one session a month, say. Whereas if you look at a number of sort of other clubs, they'll be run by people who've only just got their British Triathlon Level 1, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're starting the same journey that I started. But the quality of the coaching and the feedback you'll get and their ability to answer your questions, it is going to be somewhat, diluted, say, as opposed to sort of someone like myself who's been doing this full time for nearly 10 years now. There's no arguing there's going to be a difference there. But the fact is that the vast majority of people who are coaching in a club environment are going to be coaches starting out and cutting their teeth in the sport. And the reason, I'm afraid, is the economics. So if we take, for example, somebody who wanted to start their own triathlon club. A coach goes, okay, I'm going to start a triathlon club. Because it often is coaches who will look to found these. If they will go, right, well, if I'm looking to hire a pool, how much is it going to cost for me to hire it for an hour? And the local leisure centre may come back with a quote of about sort of £75 for the sake of argument. Okay, well, if it's going to cost me £75 to be able to put these sessions on, how many swimmers am I going to need, and what am I going to need to charge them to cover my costs? So, well, if I charge £8 a swim, which I think, for 2025 rates isn't terrible, if I charge £8 a swim, then I need to get 10 athletes in a week to break even. Yeah, it's not impossible. But it's only after they reach that 10 athlete mark they actually start making any money to take home. And when you consider that a lot of pools will struggle to fit any more than I'd say sort of 20 swimmers in. Again, some are larger, but depending on the space that you want to give swimmers, you may only actually end up with some weeks having, because even though you've got a capacity of 20, not everybody's going to make it every week. Some weeks you might end up with 20 and they might end up doing quite well for themselves. Other weeks they may only end up having sort of 13 turn up and then they're only taking home sort of £30. And when you consider where they're going to deliver the session for an hour, they're going to plan the session ahead of time, they're going to travel to the pool, they're going to travel home from the pool, economically, it's not super viable. And as a result, a lot of more experienced coaches, the really sort of top coaches out there, they're not going to be starting up triathlon, even if it's kind of a for-profit triathlon club. The model just doesn't work economically for them to be able to run these sessions, unless they already have like a massive following. If they have dozens of people in the local area who would fall over themselves to work with this coach, yeah, that could work really well. They could get a 25-metre pool that's got sort of 4, 5, 6 lanes and know that most weeks that session is going to be full to the brink. Great, I'm not saying it's a license to print money, but it is a very good use of that coach's time. But for most people who don't have this enormous audience, this enormous following, it is somewhat, is it the best use of their time? When you consider that they could, if they were coaching another sort of swimmer on a one-to-one basis, they could probably make more money from that than they would from running an entire club session. And the point I'm making here is that it's not very often that you see the cream of the crop of swim coaches that are going to be delivering sessions like this. Again, there are exceptions. Some simply sort of step in to help out triathlon clubs once a month, once a fortnight, sometimes once a week. But these are probably more the exception to the rule. Most of your club coaches are very well-meaning, very hard-working, very passionate, very driven coaches. But if you were to ask them questions surrounding nutrition, bike choice, strength and conditioning, how to structure their training, they probably wouldn't be able to help you out sort of an enormous amount. And again, that's fine. But if you are looking to really sort of achieve your potential, if you really are looking to accelerate your performance, a triathlon club isn't really the place to go to do that, I'm afraid. Triathlon clubs are fantastic for, having community, for, helping people who are just starting out to really get up to speed. But you will hit a glass ceiling with most triathlon clubs quite quickly. Some are very well set up for more sort of elite athletes. The vast majority, they're more community, they're more about getting people involved with the sport, and that's the way it should be, if you ask me. And the area where most people need the most help is swimming, and I'm bringing the conversation back round to swimming again, because it does, is a major part of any triathlon club. Is that if you have somebody watching your stroke and giving you feedback as you're swimming, this is the single best way to improve as a swimmer. Now, for a coach, they may want somebody to have a one-to-one session with them because they'll make a lot more per hour from those one-to-one sessions. But a lot of people, they can't justify that. I mean, you can be looking at close to £100 for a proper swim analysis now. If somebody's sort of renting a lane, especially if they're doing video, all the costs associated with that. Whereas paying you £10 to go down to your local triathlon club swim session and have a coach sort of look at your stroke, can be really useful. The downside to this is that, if there are another kind of 15, 20 swimmers in the pool, the coach might not have any time to look at your stroke. Now, as a coach personally, if I was running a session and a swimmer said to me, sorry, can you just have a look at my stroke? Gave me a bit of feedback, and I was always happy to do that. And so you do have to kind of be a bit vocal, if you do want some help with something. But, coaches, they're trying to keep on everybody's strokes as well as the actual kind of the running of the session itself. Some sessions almost kind of run themselves if they are relatively easy. Others, if I'm trying to sort of manage rest periods and give lots of feedback to people, it can be a lot more difficult to keep an eye on other people's strokes. So, it's a lot more economical. It's just not as efficient to be able to to go to a swim club for that technical feedback. But what swim clubs are fantastic for is camaraderie. So if you are doing a swim as part of a tri club, swimming, it can be, if you go to a public lane swim, you can have people who can let themselves into your lane doing breaststroke, who can refuse to let you pass, who can stop short of the wall. There are all these frustrating sort of incidents that can occur in a public lane swim that you won't have at a club swim. If you know everyone you're sharing your lane with, it can make for a much more pleasant experience. You can take turns being on the front. It's a lot easier. And there's also that camaraderie of pushing through that set, over your 10-second rest period between those fast 100s. You can have a drink, you can hype each other up, you can come on, let's go. After this one, we've only got 2 left, and it's a lot more motivating to have, well, for most people at least, to have somebody around them to complete a swim set with, rather than simply following a set that they've taken with them to the pool. What a triathlon swim club will not do, however, is teach you to swim. So most will have a minimum standard. I think ours used to be 100 metres. I know some have 400 metres. But this is, your ability to swim freestyle continuously for that distance, because the amount of time that it takes for me to be able to sort of help build somebody up, because I'm out of the water, every triathlon coach is going to be out of the water for sessions. It's very time intensive, and it's very stressful for me as a coach to have somebody who can barely swim in the pool, because I'm having to spend all my time, effort, energy and attention on them to make sure I'm helping them, to make sure they don't get themselves into difficulty. When you have all these other faster swimmers who are going up and down and thinking, oh, I haven't seen Simon this week, I wonder what he's doing. So there are often sort of minimum standards, and you will need to make sure you're of a certain level before you join. Now, if you are looking for adult swim lessons, there are some group swim lessons that you can do. I ran some adult swim lessons, and because they're done as part of a group, you can't spend as much time with each swimmer as you would like. You also it's one of those where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I remember there used to be a sort of a lady that came to one of these that I used to cover, and she would always be making demands on my time and my attention, which really took away from the time that I could spend with others. And there's the ideal scenario, of course, would be to get some one-to-one swimming lessons, but this is quite expensive to do. Again, if you can't afford it, if you can't sort of make the timings line up and work, then it can be a real issue. However, once you can get yourself up to that sort of that 100 meters mark, and again, normally because you're breathing, will be what's holding you back there. Once you nail that, once you can get your swim to that level, then the tri club is a brilliant next step. And if you stick with most tri clubs, they should be able to get you swimming to that kind of like 2 minutes per 100, 150 per 100 level. Most people should be able to achieve that. If you want to push a little bit above that, it may be that there aren't enough swimmers of a similar level to you in the pool to help push you there, and the coach may not have kind of the knowledge and the insight on how to actually get you to that next level. Now, a couple of years ago I worked with a business coach, and one of his favourite sayings was, "What got you here won't get you there." And this sort of reference to if you keep doing the same things over and over, then you're going to struggle to progress when you get to a certain point. And you need to acknowledge that, and you need to sort of change up that approach. And if you've been going to a tri club for several years and you've not really seen any improvement, then this really is a chance for you to go, look, I need to not necessarily step away and leave the club, but I need to rethink my training. I need to, maybe it is these sessions that are holding me back. Maybe they're not pushing me hard enough, maybe they're not long enough, maybe they're not structured enough, whatever it is, but you do need to go into it. You do need to ask yourself, okay, what can I do to really sort of bring myself to that next level? And, am I going to have to look at sort of cutting back on things instead of simply adding things? So let's summarise. Let's have a look and go, well, what is it that is sort of the real pros and what are the real cons of being a member of a triathlon club? Well, the pros are that you have that sense of community, you have that sense of camaraderie. You have people who push yourself further than you might do otherwise. You can get, a reasonable level of coaching and help with sort of your swim stroke. It can be motivating to have other people around you. You can do events and races that you wouldn't be able to do if you're training solo. The downside to triathlon clubs is that it can limit your growth. There can be a lot of drama, there can be a lot of politics that actually prevent the club from sort of growing as it should. You can get people who are there in bad faith for reasons beyond simply wanting to train, and sort of the real lack of structure in a lot of the sessions, which are sort of put together more via tradition and why not, and we've always done it this way, rather than actually sort of based on sort of science and best practices and keeping up with sort of the latest in exercise science. Now, what I'm doing is I am launching an online triathlon club, and the idea here is that I'm going to take most of the positives of the triathlon club, which is that community, which is having a swim set to follow, which is having a coach on hand, but without any of the drama, without the committee, without people there who are sort of there acting in bad faith, And the idea is that this is a way for me to create community among both the athletes that I coach and anyone out there, so that we can share ideas, so that we can motivate each other, we can encourage each other. People can find training partners. If you find somebody who lives in the same city as you or the same area who's training for the same event as you, you could meet up and you can start, have a training buddy. You can start doing sessions together. You can ask me as a coach questions. I'll be setting a weekly swim set, and this will all be completely free. Not just now, always. I want to create a community of hundreds of athletes. I'm hoping this sticks. I want to create a community of hundreds of athletes who are going to be sort of hyping each other up, who we're going to be discussing topics that are going to be of interest to them. It's going to be heavily moderated by myself. It's not going to be one of these. I mean, sort of Slow Twitch is a well-renowned triathlon forum. Some people love it, but honestly, like, it can get very gatekeepy. It can get very toxic. It can get, you can have sort of misogyny around. I'm going to be keeping a lid on this. Because it's a free club, if people start misbehaving, if people start causing problems, I'll turf them out. Yeah, I want this to be a positive club. I want this to be a positive for people. And as people engage with the community, as they complete the swim sets, as they complete fitness challenges that I set, they're going to be able to earn points within the community, which they can then redeem for coach services and products, such as, some of my courses or my ebooks, or even maybe a video swim analysis with me. Okay. So I want to create this community. I want to remove the bureaucracy. I want to remove all the frustrations there. This is me being run by me, an independent professional coach overseeing this triathlon club. Now, if you are listening to this in December 2025, if you head down into the show notes, you will find a link that you can click that will allow you to simply register your interest for the triathlon club. And there'll also be somewhere where you can add some ideas, what it is that you would like to see from the triathlon club, what would motivate you, what would interest you the most. And you will then get added onto the waiting list, and it may be that I open up this club to the people on that waiting list a bit earlier than the general public. And then when it gets to January the 1st, but if you listen to this from January the 1st onwards, you'll be able to find in the show notes instead, hopefully as long as I remember to do it, a link taking you directly to the club. Now, this club is going to be held on my via my app. It's going to be the easiest way to access it, Phase On Triathlon. And you'll be able to engage with people there. It's not on Facebook, it's not on WhatsApp, it's not clogging up different bits there. It's on its own isolated app, and you can turn the notifications off if you want and just dip in when you want to, without ads, without any of that nonsense. So, if that's of interest to you, I really hope you'll go and you'll check it out. Thank you for joining me for this little rundown, this little chat about triathlon clubs. I do believe that ultimately they are a force for good. They do much more good than they do harm. However, for a lot of athletes, they're not quite enough to be able to get them to where they want to be, to achieving the goals that they want to. And I'm hoping that my online offering will go some way to bridging that gap. Thank you again for your company this week. See you next Tuesday morning. Stay safe and enjoy your training.